So in our first half of the session this morning, we're going to be talking about Sabbath. So when we think of the word Sabbath, what are some activities that come to mind when you think of Sabbath? That's a good list of Sabbath activities. These are things that, as we're talking this morning, that we are going to hit on several of these about what it looks like to Sabbath. What does it feel like to Sabbath? How do we incorporate that into our lives? So the word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, meaning to cease. Israel was unlike any of its surrounding tribes. It had a specific day set aside for worship, prayer, and leisure. There are many scriptural references to Sabbath, and we're going to start with looking at Genesis 2, verses 2 through 3. Genesis 2, verses 2 through 3, it says, "And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." So here we have God, creator. He's been creating for the past 6 days, and now he rests from all the work that he has done. After rescuing the nation from the grip of Egypt, God commands them to keep this day holy. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11 reads, "Remember the Sabbath day, keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But on the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, or daughter, nor your male or female servant." This is the part I like, it's interesting. "Nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." Historically, the Jews celebrated Shabbat when the first star was visible in the night sky on Friday through sundown on Saturday. However, in 321 CE, Emperor Constantine, who had made Christianity the national Roman religion, declared Sunday as the day of no work instead of Saturday, which changed the Sabbath for the Roman colony to the first day of the week for the Roman Empire. Prior to this change, the followers of Christ struggled with their own Sabbath. In the beginning, all the Christian converts were Jewish, and they kept the sabbatical laws. But they also spent time in worship on Sundays, since that was the day of the week that Christ rose from the grave. Constantine's decree shifted the to cease day to Sunday. This then became known as the feast day of the Lord, as Christians gathered to worship, to pray, to sing psalms, something we didn't talk about this morning, and shared in the agape meal, which included communion. The Sabbath is still an important day for us. It should be filled with activities like prayer, family time, worship, walks, glorifying God. Tony Jones points out in his book, The Sacred Way, that keeping a Sabbath, I love this, isn't a practice that can be achieved slowly, bit by bit, over time. There must be, at some point, a decision, a radical break. Decision must be made by you and your family, and they must be articulated clearly. Keeping the Sabbath is a decision you make. So what are the theological groundings of the Sabbath? The biblical theology of the Sabbath is rooted in the creation narrative that we read in Genesis, when God rested on the seventh day and after 6 days of creating the world. The word Sabbath, we have already learned, means rest or cease, and it refers to the day of rest that God established as a holy day for his people. In the Hebrew scriptures, or what we call the Old Testament, the Sabbath was to be observed on the seventh day of the week, Saturday, and was considered a day of rest and worship. The fourth commandment in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, instructs God's people to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy as a sign of the covenant between God and his people. Throughout the Old Testament, the Sabbath was intended to be a sign of the covenant between the people, animals, and was meant to be a time for worship and reflection. In the New Testament, Jesus, as a good Jew, would have observed the Sabbath. He taught that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That can be found in Mark chapter 2, verse 27. Jesus also performed healing miracles on the Sabbath. This challenged the religious leaders' legalistic interpretation of the sabbatical laws. Luke chapter 6, verses 6 through 11. On another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and was teaching, and there was a man there whose right hand was withered. The scribes and the Pharisees were watching him closely to see if he healed on the Sabbath, so that they might find reason to accuse him. But he knew what they were thinking. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Get up and come forward." And he got up and came forward. And Jesus said to them, "I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? To save life or to destroy it?" After looking around at them all, he said to them, "Stretch out your hand." And he did so, and his hand was restored. But they themselves were filled with rage and discussed together what they might do to Jesus. Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 17. And he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and there was a woman who for 18 years had had a sickness caused by a spirit. And she was bent double and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said to her, "Woman, you are freed from your sickness." And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made erect again and began glorifying God. But the synagogue official, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, began saying to the crowd in response, "There are 6 days in which work should be done. So come during them and get healed, not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the stall and lead him away to water him? And this woman, a daughter of Abraham as she is, whom Satan has bound for 18 long years, should she not have been released from this bond on the Sabbath day?" As he said this, all his opponents were being humiliated, and the entire crowd was rejoicing over all the glorious things being done by him. Biblical theology of the Sabbath emphasizes rest, worship, and reflection as a sign of the covenant between God and his people. It is a reminder to his people to remember God's goodness and provision, and is spent as a time to honor God and enjoy his blessings. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to give me some answers, if we can write those out on the flip chart. What exactly is the difference between Sabbath and rest? What's the difference between Sabbath and rest? So rest. Rest is defined as ceasing work or movement in order to relax, refresh oneself, or recover strength. Rest to me is defined as something like hanging out at the beach, enjoying the waves crashing on the shore, watching the sunset. Now, rest is a good thing. Rest is a needed thing. We must have that. But Sabbath is more than just rest. Sabbath is resting in what God has already accomplished. It is giving him the honor and the glory for all of the good that we have available to us, that we are blessed with. On a podcast by the Bible Project, speaking about Sabbath, they said, Sabbath is not a commandment that we're bound to. It's a promise we're invited to enjoy. Sabbath rest is an invitation to practice for eternity in God's presence. It's an act of regular and intentional trust of God's rule on earth. We Shabbat in order to nuach, meaning to abide or rest in. When we stop working, we can truly rest in God's presence. In a 2006 article from Regent University entitled Overcoming Personal and Spiritual Inner Exhaustion, The Value of Rest and Renewal by Wayne Opel, he states, in his book, Paradox of Success, John O'Neill discusses how leaders have sacrificed personal values in order to further their careers. It is often manifested in workaholism. Anybody else suffer from that? Self-doubt, substance abuse, and family difficulties. These problems are often transmitted throughout the organization, causing a loss of trust in the leader's ability to lead effectively. O'Neill goes on to say that to become a long-distance winner, the leader must make a commitment to a process of self-examination, which will lead to renewal. To maintain this renewal, leaders must practice self-observation to use time effectively to rest and renew his or her physical and spiritual body. Opel continues saying, Wayne Mueller in his book, Sabbath, Finding Rest, Renewal, and Delight in Our Busy Lives, describes how the Sabbath can either be a single day or a tool for cultivating those precious human qualities that grow only in time. He states, when we consecrate time to listen to the still small voices, we remember the root of inner wisdom that makes work fruitful. We remember from where we are most deeply nourished and see more clearly the shape and texture of the people and things before us. He goes on to say that a successful life has become a violent enterprise. I really like this quote. We make war on our own bodies, pushing them beyond their limits. War on our children because we cannot find enough time to be with them. War on our spirit because we are too preoccupied to listen to the quiet voices that seek to nourish and refresh us. In an article in the Scientific American entitled Why Your Brain Needs More Downtime by Ferris Jobber in 2013, he says a 2010 LexisNexis survey of 1,700 white-collar workers in the US, China, South Africa, the UK, and Australia revealed that on average, employees spend more than half of their workdays receiving and managing information rather than using it to do their jobs. Half of the surveyed workers also confessed that they were reaching a breaking point after which they would not be able to accommodate the deluge of data. Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk, once wrote, "To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone and everything is to succumb to violence. It destroys the fruitfulness of our own work because it kills the root of inner wisdom, which makes work fruitful." I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted just thinking about all of this. I think I need a Sabbath from reading what happens to us when we don't take one. In researching this information, what struck me the most was the idea that we are literally waging war on our bodies, our minds, our families, and our communities when we don't take time to reconnect with God. How many of us come up with a million excuses of why we cannot rest? Sure. I know I'm very guilty of this. One story that pops into my mind is a time when my husband and my dad were out in the garage working on some sort of project. My dad has a multitude of health issues. And my husband, who noticed that my dad was starting to wear down really quickly, said something to my dad about just taking a rest for a few minutes. Now, my dad's reply was, "I'll sleep when I'm dead." This moment shocked my husband, and he still mentions it to me. But for me, that was the mantra that I heard when I was growing up. Keep pushing, keep moving, keep going. We'll sleep when we're dead. After reading the research, I believe I may have had a change of heart. Taking a rest and reconnecting with God goes beyond just the mere rest. In an article by Newport Beach Christian Counseling from January of 23, they said, taking time to rest and connect with God goes beyond feeling like you've had a break. There are deeper mental health benefits that people experience from routinely making time for Sabbath in their lives. A study of a small group of people at Liberty University investigated how an 8-week Sabbath routine impacted anxiety, worry, and stress. Most participants upon completion of the study showed a decrease in anxiety, worry, and stress in their lives. When you consider the benefits specifically connected to rest, there are a variety of things that help improve mental health. The National Alliance on Mental Illness describes benefits such as increased energy, which allows you to do more of the things that you really enjoy. Similarly, people who take time to rest can experience more energy to devote to the people they love and the work that is really important to them. These things all work together to improve mental well-being. As you look at the spiritual aspects of the Sabbath, such as prayer and corporate worship, the mental health benefits are also very evident. Physical components of taking a Sabbath rest include decreasing your blood pressure, relief from chronic pain, an improvement to your immune system, and a strengthening of your cardiovascular system. Spiritual components from incorporating prayer into your Sabbath rest can include things like helping your body heal more efficiently and recover faster from following medical procedures. It can regulate your breathing and in turn your heart rate. It helps relieve stress, promote physical healing. Regular Sabbath rest, including prayer, can also inhibit, and I know we've had a lot of research come out about this, the amount of cortisol and other stress hormones that negatively affect our bodies. The Sabbath is a day that God has set apart as holy, a day meant to be filled with rest and worship, a time to remember and honor God, all of God's creation, and giving thanks for all the blessings he has given us. Unfortunately, today the importance of keeping the Sabbath has been lost on many of us. The culture that we live in values productivity above all else. So what do? Well, we fill our work schedules to the max. Our children, have you noticed their calendars? Extracurricular activities, social events. This leaves us all running from event to event like chickens with our heads cut off. This is not the life that God had planned for us. This is not human flourishing. We all need some time to rest and recharge, but more importantly, we need time to reconnect with God. So let's talk about some ways that we can incorporate a Sabbath rest. How do we do this? What does it look like in our modern world? Is it still relevant to Christians today? The answer is yes, absolutely, it's relevant. What it looks like is going to be different for all of us. but the important thing is to make sure you're keeping the Sabbath. First, Sabbath rest needs to involve a break from your regular work or routine. This means that we set aside the work emails, our to-do lists, any other obligations for the day. Instead, we focus on activities that bring us joy, like spending time with loved ones or friends, enjoying God's creation, participating in your hobbies. This may also mean a complete disconnect from the rest of the world by turning off those electronic devices. Shut them down. Simply practice being, like what we talked about last night, in God's good creation. Second, Sabbath rest needs to involve time spent in worship and reflection. This might look like your attendance to Sunday morning church service. It could also and should include time to engage in personal prayer and meditation. We should be using our Sabbath time to deepen our relationship with God and to reflect on the blessings that He has in our lives. Finally, Sabbath rest should involve a spirit of gratitude and contentment. We need to take time to appreciate the blessings that God has given us, rather than focusing on what we do not have. We should foster a feeling of appreciation and gladness, knowing that God has provided for us and will continue to do so. This is part of that I surrender all attitude that we like to sing about, but find it much harder to practice. Keeping the Sabbath should be an important part of not only our spiritual, but also our physical journey.